4 seconds.
That's all it took for the world to shatter. A quiet border clinic, a sanctuary, transformed into a death trap. 6 armed men, hunting. But the predator didn't know the prey was a ghost. Would you risk everything for strangers, knowing your past hunted you too? The Obsidian Desert was Kaelen Thorne's chosen quiet. Every evening she watched the sun die behind the jagged peaks of the Ghost Mountains. It bled bruised purples into fiery oranges, a daily spectacle that demanded nothing from her but stillness. For 18 months, this ritual had been her anchor, a fragile tether to a life stripped of everything but silent service. The Haven Clinic, a converted produce warehouse, hummed faintly 2 miles north of the border, its metal walls still faintly echoing the ghost of citrus from a forgotten era. It was a place of last resort, a sanctuary for those the world had cast aside, and Kaelen was its reluctant guardian. At 34, Kaelen moved with an understated power, lean and resolute, like rock forged by erosion. Her sandy blonde hair, sun-streaked, was always pulled back in a French braid so tight it seemed to defy gravity. Her eyes, a striking gray blue, were kind, but held an assessing depth, a silent calculation. Freckles, a dusting across her nose, were the only soft imperfection, a detail that children loved to count and migrant mothers clung to for trust. Tonight, those hands, capable of stitching a wound in a moving vehicle, were wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, holding a satellite phone to her ear. "How was your day, Dad?" Kaelen's father, back in the distant cornfields of Iowa, coughed. It was the cough, the one that had started 6 months ago, leading to a diagnosis that stole futures. "Oh, watched the corn. Didn't do anything exciting." Kaelen offered a strained smile. It hurt. "You need to stop standing on the porch in this cold." His voice softened, carrying the weight of unspoken things. "Are you happy down there?" She glanced at the clinic, at the flickering lights in exam room 2, where Leo Reyes, the young green EMT volunteer, was restocking supplies, jumping at every shadow. Above the door, the faded blue sign read, Esperanza, hope. "I'm getting there, Dad." She knew he heard the lie. He always had. "You were never good at hiding, Kaelen," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Whatever you're running from, it'll find you. And when it does, you'll remember who you are." Kaelen closed her eyes. "I know who I am, Dad. I'm a nurse." "You're a lot of things, baby girl. That's just the latest one." After the call, Kaelen sat in the deepening quiet. The desert was not silent. It hummed with the wind through mesquite, the scuttle of unseen creatures, the distant, metallic sigh of the border fence. Beneath her trailer bed, next to a worn prayer book and running shoes scarred by 2,000 miles, lay a heavy rifle. She called it Coyote Defense. She hadn't told anyone about the notes. 2 in the past month slipped under her door after midnight. Same block letters, same cheap paper. "Stop treating cargo. Final warning." She'd burned them both. What could the local sheriff do? What could anyone do that she couldn't? That was Kaelen's constant, silent battle, the belief she had to shoulder every burden alone. At 11:23 p.m., her satellite phone buzzed. Maria Elena, an aid worker 15 miles south. "Group coming your way. 18 people, families, injured. Guide abandoned them in the desert. 2 children need immediate care." Standard border night. Kaelen was already moving, pulling on scrubs, lacing boots, shifting from observer to protector. She sent Leo, pale and uncertain, with flashlights and water. 2 clicks northeast, dry wash, power line cut. They'll follow it south. Breathe, Leo. Bring them in. He went. She prepped. Saline, gauze, pediatric doses. The border's cruelest work always found the children. Esperanza Mama Espe Salazar, the clinic coordinator, arrived at 11:40, a woman whose 27 years on the border had taught her questions could wait, but warmth could not. She began making coffee, laying out blankets. 40 minutes later, Leo reappeared. He supported a limping woman, his face tight with the controlled tremor of someone on the brink. Behind him, figures emerged from the inky desert. Families, children on shoulders, an old man, a pregnant woman clutching her belly with the careful deliberation of someone holding the world together. 18 people, Kaelen counted, a habit from a life she never spoke of, a number always etched into her memory. She counted 18. Then the door opened again. The night, already heavy with the scent of fear and ozone, snapped. 6 men, who were not migrants, moved through the entrance. Their entry wasn't weary. It was controlled, deliberate, spaced apart in a pattern Kaelen's body recognized before her mind fully processed it. Tactical formation. A primal alarm screamed in her spine, an instinct dormant for 8 long years. They wore dark tactical pants, body armor, night vision goggles pushed up like crowns. They carried rifles, sidearms, hardware that spoke a fluent language of violence. These were not desperate bandits. These were not opportunistic coyotes. These were Crimson Syndicate sicarios, professional killers. And there were 6 of them. What would you do, caught between desperate innocence and such calculated menace? The lead man, Alejandro El Predator Vargas, surveyed the clinic with the calm, assessing gaze of someone who had done this countless times. His face, perhaps once capable of softer lines, was now carved hard by violence. Yet a small gold crucifix gleamed at his throat. He crossed himself upon entering, a detail that sent a colder chill down Kaelen's spine than the desert night. He spoke, English, unaccented, authoritative. "Everyone inside. Now." A young migrant mother, clutching her toddler, began to weep, a raw, primal sound of terror.
"Please, they made us walk with them. They said if we didn't—"
El Predator silenced her with a look that compressed a lifetime of brutality into a single, terrifying expression. The woman went mute. The toddler did not. His gaze found Kaelen. "You're the nurse." Kaelen's hands, still holding gauze for a young boy with an ear infection, were impossibly steady. That stillness, in a room filled with weapons and crying children, and the sharp, coppery scent of fear, would have been the first alarming sign for anyone who knew what to look for. "I'm the nurse practitioner. This is a humanitarian clinic. We don't have—" "You have what we need." He gestured, and one of his men pulled a woman from the back of the migrant group. She was a ghost of a person, pale and slick with sweat, clutching her abdomen. The blood soaking through her clothes was dark, oxidized, hours old. Kaelen's trained eye instantly read the grim tableau, penetrating abdominal trauma, likely liver involvement. The woman was dying, and had been for some time. "Fix her," El Predator commanded, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. His eyes, devoid of mercy, flicked to the terrified children huddled in the corner. "Or we start with them." A heavy silence descended, a tangible weight that pressed down on every breath. Even the toddler in the corner stopped crying, as if some ancient instinct recognized the true nature of the predator in their midst. Kaelen looked at the dying woman, at the children, at the 6 armed men. This place, her sanctuary, her chosen spot to disappear, had become her trap. Nobody was supposed to find her here. Until now. Kaelen didn't know El Predator's name yet, nor his chilling moniker, El Santo, used by his people because he crossed himself before every kill. She didn't need to. She recognized the type. She had seen men like him in the valleys of forgotten wars, in places that didn't exist on any map she was allowed to discuss. True believers. Men who killed not just for money or power, but for a twisted faith in something larger than themselves. Those were the most dangerous. Mercenaries could be bought. Fanatics had to be stopped. She pushed that thought down, burying it with the others. She was a nurse now. That was the deal she'd made with herself 8 years ago, when she'd walked away from the Elite Reconnaissance unit and into a life that didn't require her to differentiate a carotid artery from a target. "I need to examine her," Kaelen stated, her voice carrying the cold, clinical authority of someone who had given orders in operating rooms without walls. "If she has a liver laceration, I need space, light, and time. Not guns in my face." El Predator studied her, a flicker of something, an intelligence behind the violence in his eyes. He noticed things. "You have all three, for now." They moved the dying woman, Elena Rios, onto the procedure table. The wound was catastrophic. Gunshot entry on the right flank, the bullet still lodged somewhere inside. The liver was bleeding slowly into her abdominal cavity, a relentless internal drip. She'd been walking for 8 hours with this wound. She should have been dead. The fact that she wasn't told Kaelen 2 things. Elena was incredibly resilient, and someone had applied field pressure correctly before abandoning her to the desert. As Kaelen worked, gloves on, betadine swabbed, IV running, her eyes moved, not just over the wound, but over the room. She counted. It was the first thing they'd taught her in assessment. Count first. Know what you have. Know what you're facing. Then decide. 6 hostiles, 4 rifles, 2 sidearms, all body armored, all with night vision gear, comms, 2 had radios. Positioning. El Predator by the procedure room door, 1 at the main entrance, 1 at the back exit, 2 roving, watching the migrants, 1 standing directly over her, watching her hands. This last one worried her. He was different, lean, quiet. He moved with a precision civilians didn't develop. He watched her the way a predator watches another, with a cold, almost respectful recognition. His name, she would learn later, was Victor Shadow Fuentes, former Grupo de Fuerzas Especiales, Mexican Special Forces. He'd been trained by Americans. He'd trained with Kaelen's kind. He knew what he was looking at. He just hadn't admitted it to himself yet. "Something's wrong with her," Shadow murmured to El Predator. His voice was low, almost imperceptible over the rhythmic drip of the IV. "She's a nurse. She's trained for emergencies." "No, this is different. Watch her eyes. She's not scared. She's assessing." Kaelen heard them. She pretended not to, leaning over Elena, adjusting the IV, checking a faint pulse. She spoke to the woman in medical Spanish, the kind learned in field hospitals, not classrooms. "Can you hear me? I'm going to help you. I need you to stay with me." Elena's eyes, brown and glassy with pain, opened. But beneath the haze, they were sharp. She gripped Kaelen's wrist, hard, with a strength that belied her fading life. She whispered in English, "They won't let anyone live. You understand? They can't." Kaelen nodded. She understood. Whatever these men wanted from Elena, information, confession, evidence, they intended to take it and leave no witnesses. The 18 migrants huddled in the waiting room weren't hostages. They were loose ends. Leo, Mama Espe, Kaelen herself. They were all dead the moment El Predator got what he came for. Kaelen looked through the procedure room doorway at the waiting area. Children. 12 of them, ranging from a toddler to a teenager. She counted them, the way she had counted children in war zones, the ones she had saved, and the ones she had been ordered to leave behind. Those numbers lived in her head like a ledger that never balanced. Tonight, she decided, the ledger would balance. "I need the children moved to exam room 3, she said to El Predator. Her voice was clinical, detached, the precise tone of a medical professional managing a workspace. "Contamination risk. If she's septic and I open her up, this room becomes a biohazard. Children can't be near it." El Predator considered. He flicked a hand. "Move the children." A young enforcer, nervous, his eyes too wide, herded the children and their mothers into exam room 3. It was away from the procedure room, away from the back door, into the most defensible room in the building, with the thickest walls and only one entrance. Kaelen hadn't mentioned any of those advantages, but she knew them with an innate, chilling certainty. She also directed Leo to move medical supplies to the supply closet adjacent to the back hallway. "More saline, more gauze, the whole crash cart," she instructed. She was positioning obstacles, creating choke points, clearing sightlines. The Haven Clinic was becoming something it had never been before. It was becoming a battle space. And the woman shaping it had been doing exactly this, in worse conditions, in darker places, for longer than any of these men had been killing. 800 meters northeast of the Haven Clinic, lying prone behind a ridge of desert scrub that smelled of creosote and dried blood, Mateo Rattlesnake Cruz was fighting to remain conscious. He'd been shot twice, once in the left thigh, once through the meat of his right shoulder. The thigh was the critical problem, not arterial, or he'd already be dead, but deep enough that every shift sent a fresh wave of white-hot pain from hip to jaw. He had applied a tourniquet, his belt cinched tight with a stick for leverage. Field medicine. Ugly, but functional. The kind of medicine Caelen Thorne had taught him. Mateo had been part of the federal agent extraction team meant to bring Elena Rios across the border 6 hours earlier. 4 agents, 1 armored vehicle, 1 informant with $200 million worth of syndicate secrets memorized in her head. A clean operation, in and out. Except the Crimson Syndicate had been waiting at the crossing point with more men and more guns than anyone had anticipated. 3 agents dead. Mateo, wounded, had crawled into the desert while the sicarios took Elena, marching her north with a group of intercepted migrants as cover. He had tracked them for 6 agonizing hours, limping, bleeding, following their encrypted GPS signals on the tablet that had miraculously survived the ambush. When they stopped at the clinic, he had positioned himself on the ridge and pulled out his rifle scope. That's when he saw her. Through the scope, through the grimy window of the procedure room, he saw a blonde woman with a French braid leaning over a patient on a table. She wore blue scrubs and an expression he recognized from a place he never discussed at dinner parties. An expression of absolute, controlled fury, masked as professional calm. He adjusted the scope, zoomed in, watching her hands. "No way," he whispered, a cloud of breath in the frigid desert air. He had served with Caelen Thorne for 3 years in the Elite Reconnaissance unit. He had watched those hands pack his collapsed lung with gauze in a valley half a world away, while bullets sparked off the rocks around them. He had felt those hands, impossibly steady, insert a chest tube between his ribs while she directed suppressive fire with her other hand. He still had the 5-inch scar, just below his right pectoral. She'd told him it would fade. It hadn't. He was glad. The last time he'd seen her was the day she processed out. She'd looked like someone who had already left long before the paperwork was signed. He'd asked her what she was going to do. She'd said, Something quiet. He'd replied, "You're the loudest quiet person I've ever met." She hadn't laughed. 8 years. No contact. He'd searched for her, casually at first, then with increasing concern as the years passed. It was like she'd vanished. She hadn't. She had walked to the edge of the world instead. He keyed his radio. Backup. A federal tactical team scrambled from their field office was 40 minutes out. "This is Rattlesnake. I need you to listen to me very carefully. The Haven Clinic, Border Town X. 6 hostiles inside, 18 civilian hostages, 1 HVT, Elena Rios, alive, gunshot wound. And there's a nurse in there."
"Copy, Rattlesnake. We'll handle the nurse. What's your condition?"
The nurse isn't a nurse. Mateo swallowed, tasting blood and dust. "Pull military records for Kaelen Thorne, Sergeant First Class, Elite Reconnaissance Unit, 2nd Battalion, call sign, Shepherd." Silence on the radio. Then,
"Say again? You're telling me there's a ranger in that clinic?"
"I'm telling you there's a ranger in that clinic, and she doesn't know I'm out here, and those 6 men inside have no idea who they're locked in with." He watched through the scope as Kaelen moved through the procedure room, her body cutting angles he recognized, her feet finding positions that weren't accidental. She was mapping the room. She was preparing. "Expedite your ETA," he urged, "and when you get here, be very careful about who you point your weapons at. Shepherd doesn't miss." He set the radio down and pressed his forehead into the dirt. The pain was worsening. The desert cold seeped into his wound, his fingers growing numb, a chilling sign of blood loss or dropping temperatures. Probably both. He thought of the last time he'd been this hurt. A valley in a forgotten country, an ambush from 3 sides, and the unforgettable sound of bullets hitting rock. 2 soldiers dead before anyone could react. Mateo on the ground, a collapsed lung, a femur shattered. The world graying at the edges. And then Kaelen sliding in next to him as if born of that dirt, hands already moving. "Hey, Rattlesnake. Bad day. I'm going to fix it. Stay with me." Matter of fact, as if ordering lunch, not surrounded by tracer fire. She'd packed his lung, splinted his femur, given him her own blood, literally, because supplies were gone. She kept him alive for 6 hours. She kept 3 of them alive for 11. They'd given her a commendation. She'd given it back. He understood now. Inside the clinic, time was a living, breathing thing, and it was running out. Elena was crashing. The liver hemorrhage was accelerating. Kaelen needed blood. The clinic kept a small emergency supply, O negative, in a refrigerator in the supply closet. It was across the room, and between her and it stood El Predator, who had moved closer, observing the surgery with the morbid curiosity of a man who had caused more wounds than he had ever witnessed repaired. "She's dying," Kaelen stated, flat, factual. "Then work faster. I need blood. It's in the supply closet." "If I don't get it in the next 3 minutes, she bleeds out, and whatever you want from her dies with her." El Predator flicked his gaze to the closet, then back to Kaelen. He stepped aside, just slightly, just enough for her to pass. It was a gap, a small one, the kind a civilian would walk through, the kind a ranger would use for something else entirely. But not yet. "Not yet, Leo." Kaelen's voice was steady. The steadiness wasn't an act. It was a state she entered without conscious decision, like a pilot's hands finding controls in turbulence. "Bring me 2 units of O negative from the fridge, and the ketamine, 2nd shelf, blue label." Leo brought them, his hands shaking so violently the bags swung like pendulums. She took them without comment. When I tell you, apply direct pressure to her liver. Both hands. Don't stop. I don't know if I can. She held his gaze, the same look she'd given terrified young recruits. You can. You will. Because she needs you to. That's enough. Leo swallowed, nodded. Okay. She turned back to Elena, hung the blood, started the transfusion. Then, while adjusting the IV line, she palmed the ketamine vial, a smooth, invisible movement perfected not on stages, but in combat aid stations where supplies had to be hidden from hostile eyes. She loaded a syringe under the pretense of checking the IV port, capped it, slid it into her scrub pocket. No one saw. Except Shadow. Shadow saw. He didn't see the ketamine, but he saw the precise economy of her hands, the way she accomplished 2 tasks in a single fluid motion. He'd been trained to move like that. He'd been trained by people who moved like that. And a cold, hard realization was forming in his mind like ice on a windshield. This woman was not what she appeared to be. El Predator, he said quietly. We need to talk. After. Now. Shadow pulled him to the hallway. Kaelen heard them through the thin wall, murmuring in Spanish. She caught fragments. Military. The way she moves. Something wrong. She had minutes, maybe less. She looked at the procedure room, at the positions she'd mapped in her mind. El Predator would come back through the door, Shadow behind him. Ghost, the silent, scarred man who watched everything, said nothing, was standing by the supply closet, 3 feet to her left. Miguel, the youngest, the one with the conscience and the nervous eyes, was near the doorway to the waiting room. The 2 cousins, Rodrigo and Beto, were with the migrants. 6 targets, 1 nurse, 18 families. And somewhere in the desert, someone else. She didn't know who. She didn't know he was there, but she'd spent 18 months on this border and she knew the sound of the desert at night. Something was different out there. Something was watching. It didn't matter. She couldn't count on something she couldn't see. Her father's voice 6 hours ago. Whatever you're running from, it'll find you. And when it does, you'll remember who you are. Kaelen remembered. Sergeant First Class Kaelen Thorne, Elite Reconnaissance Unit, call sign Shepherd. 8 years, 7 deployments. Commendation returned. 3 men alive because she refused to let them die in a valley half the world away. 40 civilians saved because she disobeyed an order. 23 women and children freed from shipping containers because she went through the door first. She'd sworn she'd never be that person again. But standing in this clinic, with 12 children behind a wall and 6 killers between them and tomorrow, she understood something her father had always known, and she'd been too stubborn to admit. You don't stop being who you are. You just stop pretending you're someone else. Elena Rios's monitor beeped, a sharp, insistent demand. Her blood pressure was plummeting. It was now or never. Kaelen called out, her voice cutting through the strained silence. I'm losing her. I need everyone out of this room. Contamination risk. Now! El Predator came back through the door, Shadow close behind. They both stopped at the threshold. El Predator opened his mouth to speak. Kaelen stumbled. It was perfect. The tired nurse, 18 hours into her shift, catching her foot on a table leg as she rushed to her dying patient. She fell toward El Predator, not directly at him, but near him, close enough for her hand to find his neck. The 14-gauge needle entered his carotid artery with surgical precision. Not the precision of someone who had learned anatomy in a classroom, but the devastating intimacy of someone who had used anatomy to save lives in combat and knew exactly where life ended. He dropped. 4 seconds. That's how long it took El Predator to die. That's how long Kaelen had before the world caught up. She used every fraction of them. The surgical tray was in her right hand before El Predator's body hit the linoleum floor. She spun, throwing it not at Shadow, who was already reaching for his rifle, but at Miguel, the youngest sicario, the one standing near the doorway where the children were. The tray caught him across the face. A 2-pound stainless steel disc traveling at the speed of 8 years of compressed violence. His weapon discharged, the shot punching into the ceiling. Plaster rained down like dirty snow, a sudden blinding flurry. Ghost moved. He was fast, faster than a man his age should have been, the kind of speed forged in specialized unit training and a lifetime of being the one nobody saw coming. His hand found his sidearm, drew it, turned toward Kaelen, and stopped. Because Kaelen had already reached him. The ketamine syringe, loaded, prepped, hidden in her pocket since she'd palmed it during the IV setup, went into the muscle of his neck. Not a kill dose, but a paralytic. He would be conscious, but unable to move for 20 minutes. His eyes went wide, then glazed over. His gun arm dropped to his side like a puppet whose strings had been severed. He stood there, swaying. A statue of a man who had once terrified drug lords across 3 states, now defeated by a nurse with a needle and a plan. Outside, through the window, 800 meters away, Mateo Rattlesnake Cruz watched through his rifle scope and felt something he hadn't experienced since the Forgotten Valley. A jolt of absolute certainty. The blonde nurse had just taken down 2 Crimson Syndicate enforcers in 6 seconds using a needle and a surgical tray. She hadn't used a gun. She hadn't needed one. "This is Rattlesnake," he keyed into his radio, his voice tight with urgency. "Expedite. I repeat, expedite. Shepard is active." Inside, chaos erupted. Rodrigo and Beto, the young cousins, the ones who had never truly killed before and were completely unequipped for whatever this was, panicked. Rodrigo bolted for the back exit. He made it 4 steps before Mama Espe, 58 years old, grandmother, former migrant, a woman who carried the fury of a lost son deep in her soul, swung a mop handle into his shins with the force of 2 decades of grief. He went down. Leo Reyes, his hands still trembling, grabbed IV tubing from the nearest rack and zip-tied Rodrigo's wrists behind his back. It wasn't pretty. It held. Beto froze. He stared at El Predator's body on the floor. He stared at Ghost, standing motionless, eyes open but seeing nothing. He looked at the blonde woman who had done this, who was already turning toward him, a scalpel in her right hand, and an expression on her face he would remember for the rest of his life. Not rage, not cruelty, but chilling clarity. The look of someone who knew exactly what she was willing to do, and had already done the math. He dropped his weapon. His hands went up. He started crying. He was 27 years old, and he wanted his mother. That left Shadow. Victor Shadow Fuentes was not Rodrigo. He was not Beto. He was a former Special Forces soldier with combat training that paralleled Kaelen's own. He did not panic. He took cover behind the doorframe of the procedure room. He created distance. He brought his rifle up, sighting down the hallway. And for the first time since the siege began, Caelen Thorne felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. She felt matched. They faced each other across the procedure room's 6 feet of scuffed linoleum, and a lifetime of violence stretched between them. He had a rifle. She had a scalpel, and the terrain she'd been shaping for the past 40 minutes. You were military, Shadow stated. It wasn't a question. American military. Kaelen positioned herself between Shadow and the doorway to exam room 3, where 12 children were pressed against the far wall. Her body was a shield. It had always been a shield. That was the part of military service she'd never been able to leave behind. Not the violence, but the willingness to stand between harm and the harmless. "I'm a nurse practitioner," she said. "This is a humanitarian clinic." No nurse moves like that. Who were you? Kaelen was silent for a beat. Someone who learned that saving lives and taking them require the same skills. I chose saving. You chose wrong. Shadow's finger rested on the trigger, but he was hesitating. He knew what he was seeing. He'd been trained by people who moved like this woman. He'd seen the economy of motion, the way she sliced angles, the way she cleared her own position before engaging. This wasn't self-defense. This was doctrine. "You can't win this," he said. "Even if you kill me, there are more outside. More coming." "There's no one outside. Your backup is 40 miles away." She took a breath. "And the man in the desert with the rifle?" "He's not yours." Shadow's eyes flicked to the window. A fraction of a second. The oldest mistake in combat. Looking where your enemy points instead of at your enemy. She was already moving. The scalpel opened his forearm, a precise cut, radial artery. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to make his hand useless. He dropped the rifle. Her knee took his legs out. Her elbow finished it. Elite Reconnaissance Unit combatives. Brutal. Efficient. Over in 6 seconds. Kaelen picked up his rifle, walked to the window, tapped on the glass 3 times, a pause, then 2 times. In the desert, Mateo Rattlesnake Cruz saw the signal through his scope. 3-2. Elite Reconnaissance Unit recognition code. A code they'd used in forgotten valleys, in nameless places. He allowed himself one moment of disbelief, one moment to marvel at the fact that Sergeant First Class Kaelen Thorne, the woman who'd returned a commendation because she didn't think she deserved it, who'd walked away from the greatest fighting force on Earth to hold the hands of dying migrants in a clinic nobody had heard of, had just neutralized 6 Crimson Syndicate sicarios with a needle, a scalpel, a syringe of ketamine, and the kind of quiet, devastating competence that an elite reconnaissance unit had spent a century perfecting. Then he keyed his radio. "Shepard is secure, all hostiles down. Expedite medical, we have wounded." The Federal tactical team arrived 14 minutes later, having driven the 65 miles from Tucson in a time that would have impressed a race car driver and terrified everyone else on the road. They burst through the clinic doors in full tactical gear, weapons up, voices sharp, and then stopped. They found 6 Crimson Syndicate sicarios neutralized, 1 dead, 5 incapacitated. 18 migrants unharmed, every single one. 1 EMT, Leo, in shock but functional. 1 clinic coordinator, Mama Espe, holding a mop handle and daring anyone to come near the children. And 1 nurse practitioner, Kaelen Thorne, in blood-soaked scrubs, elbow deep in the abdomen of a cartel defector, performing surgery with instruments that belonged in a dusty warehouse and skills that belonged somewhere else entirely. "Clear the room," Kaelen said without looking up, her voice steady despite the thrumming adrenaline. "And somebody get me real sutures. These are veterinary grade." Elena Rios survived. She would spend 3 weeks in a Tucson hospital, followed by 6 months in witness protection. Her testimony would ultimately dismantle the Crimson Syndicate's Pacific Corridor, putting 23 key figures in federal prison. The account numbers she had memorized, $200 million in routing information, would lead to the largest cartel asset seizure in agency history. But that was later. That was headlines and courtrooms in a world Kaelen Thorne would never willingly re-enter. Now, in the gray light before dawn, with federal agents processing statements and paramedics treating the migrants in 2 ambulances parked where her trailer had sat, Mateo Rattlesnake Cruz limped through the clinic door and found her. She was sitting on the floor of exam room 2, methodically scrubbing blood off her hands with antiseptic wipes. Thorough, ritualistic, the way she had scrubbed after every operation in the field, not because the blood was hard to remove, but because the scrubbing was the transition, the bridge between the person who did the violence and the person who lived the rest of the day. Mateo sat next to her, wincing with the pain from his wounds. He was limping badly. He had been shot twice. He was smiling. "Sergeant First Class Thorne." Kaelen didn't look up. "I'm not a Sergeant First Class anymore." "You never stopped being one." He leaned his head back against the wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and outside, the first hint of dawn was painting the ghost mountains in colors nobody would be watching tonight. "I looked for you after you got out. Nobody knew where you went." Mateo paused, his voice rough. "That was the point. You could have done anything. Hospitals, agency work, private practice. But you came here. A clinic in the middle of nowhere, treating people nobody else will touch." He glanced at her, then away. "Same thing you did in Forgotten Valleys, in devastated villages. You always found the ones who needed you most." Kaelen stopped scrubbing, held still. In the waiting room, she could hear the sounds of rescue, children's voices, radio chatter, the particular quality of noise that accompanies the aftermath of survival. A grandmother being treated for dehydration, 2 teenage boys giving statements in halting English, young Tomas, the 7-year-old with the ear infection, fast asleep on a cot, his mother's hand on his chest, monitoring his breathing, the way mothers do when they've come close to losing everything and need proof that they haven't. "The military pointed me at targets," Kaelen said finally, her voice low. "I got to decide what to do when I got there. Out here." She gestured at the clinic, at the walls she'd turned into a fortress, at the exam rooms she'd converted to safe zones, at the procedure table where she'd saved a woman the Syndicate wanted dead. "I get to choose who I help. And tonight they chose for me." She looked at the migrants being led to warm vehicles, wrapped in blankets, offered water and food by people who spoke their language and knew their names. Children reunited with parents, families intact, all of them. Every single one. "I chose right." Mateo nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin. Elite Reconnaissance Unit, 2nd Battalion. The same coin they'd both carried in another life, in another world. He held it out to her. Kaelen looked at it for a long time, the cold metal glinting in the harsh light. "I don't need it," she said. "I know. Take it anyway." She did. She held it in her palm, and for a moment she was 23 again, standing in a valley, blood on her hands, and 3 dying men who were going to live because she refused to let them die. She'd been so angry that day, angry at the mission, at the enemy, at the mountains themselves for being so high and the helicopters for being so slow. She turned that anger into action, into survival, into 11 hours of medicine performed under fire that they'd called heroic and she'd called delayed death. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't sure when that had changed. Maybe tonight. Maybe earlier. Maybe the moment she'd signed on at the Haven and started treating people who weren't targets, who weren't objectives.
who were just human beings walking through a door because they had nowhere else to go. Matteo made sure her military background didn't leak. He owed her a scar, a life, and 8 years of silence. The news reported it as Border Clinic Nurse Saves Migrants from Cartel Attack. No rank, no unit, no call sign. The clinic reopened 2 weeks later. New funding arrived. National attention does that. Interview requests, job offers, documentary pitches. Kaelen turned them all down. "I'm not a story," she told Mama Espe. "I'm just a nurse." She returned to work the next night. Same shift, same trailer, same patients who needed someone to care about them when the rest of the world looked away. But the migrants talked. They always do.
In shelters from border town X to distant cities, in church basements and community centers, in the back rooms of restaurants where people gather to share the stories that keep them alive. They whispered about a woman at a border clinic, La Pastora, the shepherdess, the blonde nurse who stood between the wolves and the flock and didn't flinch. They said she worked overnight shifts. They said she never turned anyone away. They said that if you were hurt, if you were lost, if you had walked through the desert with nothing and arrived with even less, there was a place called Esperanza, hope, where a woman with freckles on her nose and steel in her spine would take care of you. They said she was just a nurse. They were wrong. And they were exactly right. Kaelen would have hated the nickname if she knew about it. She kept working anyway. She called her father that night. He answered on the first ring, the way dying men do when every call might be the last. "How was your day, sweetheart?" She smiled. "It didn't hurt this time. I remembered who I am, Dad." Silence on the line. Then, softly, "Took you long enough?" She laughed. It sounded like the first honest sound she'd made in 8 years. There's a clinic on the outskirts of Border Town X, in the Obsidian Desert, where the lights are always on. It doesn't look like much, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and an X-ray machine that works when it feels like it. You won't find it on any list of great hospitals. You won't find its nurse practitioner on any list of decorated heroes, though she should be on both. What Caelen Thorne discovered that night, what the blood and the fear and the sound of a needle finding its target taught her, was something we all know, but most of us spend our lives trying to forget. You cannot outrun who you are. The skills we bury, the instincts we suppress, the parts of ourselves we're afraid of, they don't disappear. They wait. And when the moment comes, when the wolves are at the door and the flock is behind you, those buried things become the only things that matter. Some people choose healing because they're gentle. Others choose it because they know exactly how much damage the world can do, and they've decided to stand in the way. Caelen Thorne stood in the way, and 18 families got to see tomorrow because of it.